Well, hello there. Welcome to a new video. This video is going to be slightly different from my usual videos. This is going to be a review and discussion and just overall giving you my thoughts on a particular title. That title is Dead Space, the remake. When the remake was first announced back in 2021, I had done a video going over my thoughts, my hopes, my fears, things of that nature. Looking back on it and leading up to the release of the game, I realized that I was both an optimist and a realist. The optimist side of me was hopeful that the remake would be good, that it would reinvigorate interest in this franchise that I love so much. Also, I just couldn't help but be a little excited for the remake, simply because at that time, it had been 8 years since we'd had anything from this franchise. That being said, however, the realist side of me was like, well, it's EA. They killed Visceral, which I will never forgive. They are very microtransaction happy, shoving them into games where they are not wanted nor needed, like Dead Space 3, which I will continue to defend Dead Space 3. They only said yes to this remake because they saw how much money Capcom was making with the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3. Also, out of all that, the main thing that made me concerned was the fact they were giving this to a relatively new developer in EA Motive, which at the time only had one game to their credit. They did Star Wars Squadrons. That was their first main game, which I thought was okay for the most part. It could have used a third-person camera, but other than that, it was all right. I believe they also did support for Battlefront 2. I think they did the campaign, which I also thought was pretty good. So I was leery to say the least. That being said, however, the remake has come out. I've played it quite a few times now, and I have to say, this remake is one damn good remake. I have to give props to EA Motive. They treated this IP with respect. They did not go out of their way to make crazy, unnecessary changes to the story or the gameplay, anything like that. Also, leading up to the game's release, they were doing these developer live streams, basically showing people where they were at during development, and they also were taking fan feedback into consideration. Like, I remember during one of the earlier ones, they were showcasing some of the weapons, and they did not sound right. So they took fan feedback into consideration with that, and they went back and tweaked the weapons so they sounded correct. So again, major props. So overall, the remake doesn't really, it's not a one-to-one remake of the game. There are some changes, but the story relatively remains the same. The changes that were mainly made were in terms of gameplay and characters. Those would be the following. First off, Isaac speaks in this remake. In the original, he did not speak. which at the time was fine. We were experiencing the horrors of the Ishimura through him, so that made sense for him to be silent. What didn't make sense with him being silent, however, is the fact that he would not respond to, say, being asked a question by Hammond or Kendra. He would, when they would say, "Hey, Isaac, you need to go fix this part of the ship before we all die," he just was silent. He wouldn't respond. Also, he would not respond to any of the horrors that were going on around him. Nothing. He would just be like, that. So, didn't make sense. However, in the remake, with him speaking, it makes much more sense. He's not just dead silent on the things going on around him. Now, when I say that he speaks, he doesn't speak throughout the whole game. If you were going from the bridge to engineering to fix something, he's not just being chatty. He only talks when he's being spoken to from like either Hammond, Kendra, Dr. Kine, things of that nature. So also I really appreciate the fact that they brought back Gunnar Wright to do this, to do the voice and motion capture. Um, Gunnar Wright is Isaac for a lot of people, myself included. So I'm glad they brought him back. Now, as far as other characters, I would say Hammond and Kendra are pretty much the same as their original counterparts. I think they're a little bit more grounded in the remake, personally, but that's just my opinion. As far as the other two crew members of the Killian, I have to give EA Motive props again for making me feel and give a shit about these two characters, because in the original game, both characters die within like the first 5 minutes. Now, to be fair, one of them does die pretty much in the same spot as the original. However, that short amount of time, like that, like first like few minutes leading up from the Killian going to the flight lounge and getting things set in motion, it made me feel for Chen, who was one of the disposable characters. Same with Johnson. In this version, she, who was originally a male in the original game, but in this remake, she survives that first encounter. And again, when I went back to the Killian, telling her what was going on, and we had to, start the Killian back up to get ready to get the fuck out of there, it made me feel for her character and feel bad and sad that would eventually happen to her. So again, I gotta give it to EA Motive, because in the original game, you don't really care about those two characters because they just died the first 5 minutes. You don't know anything about them. But in the remake, those little those little few minutes of just interaction made me feel for them. So again, props. As far as characters like Dr. Kine and Dr. Mercer, uh, Dr. Kine is pretty much the same, I'd say. Nothing really major change from the original to the remake. He's I'd say he's slightly less crazy. If that makes any sense. So, but Dr. Mercer, I think, was the one character that got a lot of not super duper changes, but I think they made his character better. In the original game, he was just basically, he was a mad scientist, but he was more what's the word? He was a mad scientist and he was obsessed with the marker. But I don't know. It feels like, to me, in the remake, it made him much more, I guess, mad. I guess is the word I'd say. He's much more obsessive. He's much more obsessive in the remake than the original. He's very desperately wanting to trigger a convergence event in the remake, which is a little nod towards Dead Space 3. So that's another thing I like about the remake. They picked certain things from Dead Space 2 and 3 and kind of put them in here to kind of show where the story is leading. So I like that. But Mercer, his character, I'd say I liked his character more in the remake. I think I have to go back and play the original, but I really liked him in the remake for sure. There are two other characters that you don't really meet in the original game. Two other survivors, Jacob Temple and Elizabeth Cross. You just find audio logs from them, and you don't really see them. You see both near the end of the game before Mercer kills them both. The remake, however, you do meet Mercer, or not Mercer, excuse me. You do meet Cross in the hydroponics section. That's one thing they changed, where instead of meeting Hammond at hydroponics, you meet Cross, and you work with her to destroy the Leviathan. And that was good, seeing other survivors besides the usual that we knew from the original. So, like I said, overall the story is pretty much the same. Nothing's really been changed a whole lot. Now the Ishimura itself, unlike the original game where it was broken up into chapters, um, the remake is much more like kind of a one-shot type of experience where there's still chapters, but it's not. You don't go from you don't get on the tram and go to a specific section of the ship and you're there for a set amount of time. Then you go back to the tram, move on near the next chapter, different section of the ship. The Ishimura is completely explorable and backtrack and back. You can backtrack, which is good. You can do a lot of exploring. One of the things they added was security clearance. So this is how you can find some new weapons and upgrades for your weapons, which is good. It makes you want to backtrack and explore every nook and cranny of the Ishimura, which is good. I like that. Um, Another thing they added to the gameplay was the peeling system, where unlike the original game, where you just aim for the limb and just shoot, and that's it. In this, they made you have to be strategic, which again, that was the whole point of the game. Strategic dismemberment. So with this peeling system, you have to peel back the layers in order to get to the limb. So the first layer is the flesh. You have to peel the flesh away. Then there's the bone. You have to get peel the bone away. And then there's the muscle. And then finally you get the detachment. You get to sever the limb. So again, you have to be strategic, especially if you're ambushed or surrounded. So again, props. Now, before I finish this video, the one thing they added, I just really did enjoy. It really pulled at my heartstrings a bit. Now, in the original game, we did not know much about Isaac or Nicole's relation. Oh, Nicole, before I do that, I forgot. Nicole. Nicole is also really good in the remake. She's much more. She's more than just. She's presented as more than just being a regular doctor. She's on the ship to help. Try to not reconvert, but sort of move people away from unitology, which in the remake was introduced way earlier. So, and Isaac knows what it is. He's not questioning like unitology. What is this exactly? He knows what it is from the get go. So, but circling back around, the thing they added was such a for me it just pulled, like I said, at my heartstrings when I saw it. Near the end of the game, there is a hallucination / cutscene that plays out. Isaac is basically remembering his last video call to Nicole. Now, like I said, in this universe, in this remake universe, Nicole isn't just a doctor. She is trying to get people who are entrenched in unitology to sort of break away and kind of go back to living like normal lives, not being inside a cult anymore. So, but in this cutscene hallucination, Isaac and Nicole are talking, and Isaac tells Nicole that his mother, who had been seeing Nicole to try to break away and break Unitology's grip on his mother, Isaac tells her that his mother, had returned home after seeing Nicole after some point and killed herself and his father. And before he could even do anything, to take the bodies home, to start preparations for a funeral, things of that nature, the Church of Unitology swept in and basically took that moment and that right from him. And in his grief, he semi-blamed Nicole for this. Now, obviously, it was not her fault. Nicole felt that his mother was making progress and felt that she would be fine and would be doing good at her own home. However, that obviously proved to not be the case. But to Isaac, I think he even says this, to Isaac it was basically like Nicole killed them herself, which, again, is not true, obviously. But in a person's grief can make them say and do things that they don't really mean. And that leads them to kind of argue, really, and they fight. And that turns out to be their last communication, their last interaction before the events on the Ishimura happen. So, in Isaac's mind, the last words he said to Nicole was basically, I hate you, you killed my parents. Again, not literally, but, and that just made me, like I said, made me feel for both him and Nicole so much more. And overall, this remake is one hell of a game. And if you are not a fan of this franchise and you're mildly interested, pick this game up. It's a hell of a game. It's a hell of an experience. And I hope to see what Motive does next with this franchise. I think it's in good hands, seeing the love, dedication that they did on this game. I hope to see more. I think we will. That said, if you guys enjoyed this little video, tomorrow I'm going to be doing another new type of video, but you will see that tomorrow. So until then, take care, and Altman be praised.